Okay, thank you. Hi guys, we're back. So welcome to the guys. Maybe some of you were in the previous session here as well. So be a great session with what we actually have called influencers. Yeah, so here are people that are influencing the startup community, given that startup community is pretty important to AWS and the way that we serve them. So we decided to invite three very important players in that world, at least. Also three players that all have very different views in how they approach the startup ecosystem. So David Cohen from Techstars, the founder of Techstars, Ash Fontana from Angellist, and then Albert-Wenger from USV, one of the more traditional VCs, although these guys have a great reputation. Unfortunately, I've heard that Albert is delayed, so I'm not really sure whether he's going to make it to the end of the session, but let's just hope that he is. I'm going to start off with inviting David Cohen on stage. He is founder and CEO of Techstars. I don't know how many companies have come out of your world by now, but we want to congratulate you, David, because you guys have a birthday today.
We do,
yeah?
Yes.
7 years old, young, I don't know how you... Please take a seat. Actually, I think we have something for you. Yeah, so let's see if you can make it drop. Yes.
You guys are all about the sugar.
So I think.
What am I supposed to do with it exactly? Oh, got it. Thank you.
All right. There will be cake for you guys afterwards. There also will be cupcakes. Just leave them alone for a moment. Let's just run through the session first. And yeah, but that's just for everybody. This is just for people that come to listen to you. Yeah. We also have a. You brought a nice, interesting video with you, and let's listen to that. Is the music on?
We started this crazy thing together in 2007 as an experiment in entrepreneurship to create a model, mentor-driven accelerator model.
Techstars.
Should I do the voiceover?
Everybody wants to know what it's like to have so many people in a room working on an idea you came up with.
David met with me on one of my random days. We didn't know each other. He tried to get on my calendar for a couple of months. Described this idea of what has turned into not just Techstars, but also the template for mentor-driven accelerator. And within about 5 minutes, I said, awesome, I'm in, let's figure it out. I think I said something like, as long as you're not a flake and a crook, I'm game.
We were really hopeful about what Techstars was going to be able to do for us. We didn't know what to expect. We were a little nervous.
This was going to be a really exciting thing for us.
But it really is the power of the network.
I'm an investor in Techstars as well, so I helped pick some of you guys. I was against 4 of you, I won't tell you.
We're doing behind the scenes.
Oh, okay.
We have a strange request right now. We're actually being filmed for a documentary this summer.
It's just such a great story relative to innovation and founders.
Nobody knows, so you got to go out there and try it.
Look at the problems you have and try and solve one of them yourselves, and you'll be the best judge of whether or not you're solving that problem if you have it yourself.
I've always thought of automatic as a marathon, not a sprint.
What the internet does is it makes us able to connect.
I love what I'm doing because I get to work with the absolute best founders and the best mentors, and I learn something new every single day.
Ready? 1, 2, 3,
We are the only accelerator that has literally tied the United States together and now the globe.
Everyone in London, we're wishing you the best of luck from the whole Techstars team on Demo Day.
Boston, Seattle.
New York. You guys ready to ride?
Techstars has done some great stuff, but I think the most interesting thing is this network, so I'm just psyched that you guys are here. Thank you.
Really, the essence of that incredibleness is all the people in this room. And Techstars wouldn't exist, wouldn't be meaningful. The thing we've worked on hard together, collectively together, and not just now in Boulder, but in many places around the world, wouldn't exist at all without the community and the network that's built from that.
The friendships I created here are lifetime.
We are now all the way up to number 26 in exits, which is pretty remarkable.
You guys are watching us watch history.
I'm just really proud of him. He's done a good job.
It's so fundamental to tell kind of the whole journey of what happened. You're almost lending a hand to the next generation of entrepreneurs.
This story is only through the first couple of chapters.
2007 to 2013, we sort of look at that and say, yep, that happened.
Well, thank you, David, for all that you've done for the startup community. I think you guys are still, you're a role model, I think, for how to interact with young businesses, how to motivate them, not only through investment, but I think mentorship is probably, if every Techstar company that I've talked to is amazed about what you guys do in bringing mentors on board. Yeah, so I think that's definitely one of the most important
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it really is that community that you heard Brad Feld talking about in the video there. There's 1,200 mentors across the system that contribute their time and energy. There's tons of great partners like you guys that contribute technology and assistance with it, and it's really an unfair advantage for these companies to get so much help from so many great people, and that's what we try to bring together.
Yeah, but one step before, what is it about Boulder that this starts there?
People always say, why'd you start Techstars in Boulder? And I say, well, because that's where I live, so it seemed like a logical place. Boulder's a very give-first community. If you go there, you're very welcomed very quickly. People will meet with you. They recognize it's not zero-sum as a game of entrepreneurship, and it's just an attitude of trying to help each other and a community that's very open door and easy to access. So I think that really worked to our advantage early on.
Okay, but of course, I mean, you guys may have started in Boulder. You're in many different cities now. How many different Techstars are there?
Yeah, there's 7 now.
7.
Yep.
Including one that focuses on cloud. Yep.
Yeah, so we have a couple of verticalized programs.
Yeah.
We have one that's very specific to cloud. Some people think that it's all remote mentorship, but it's actually just a physical program focused on cloud technologies.
Yeah. You also have one, I believe, in Portland that is now focused. Is that one that's focused on sort of the Nike style interaction?
It's a quantified self, digital health, sport, and that's actually a Nike program that we run for them.
So how is it to interact with a company like Nike and actually sort of manage their incubation program for them? Is that how it looks? How you think about that?
It's a blast. I mean, it's definitely a little different. We actually run the whole thing. It's our people, it's our system, but what we're getting is a ton of help from them.
Yeah.
So again, contributing technology, people got to use the Nike Plus API earlier. They got to access the executives in the company, but we're running the same style program.
Okay. So 7 years, 7 cities. What has changed over those 7 years?
Well, I think certainly the scale is one thing. I mean, we're now, there's the 7 cities and then a few corporate programs. So we're funding a little bit over 100 companies a year now.
Yeah.
So that's quite a build of a portfolio of companies that you have to try to help. And for me personally, I still love nothing more than actually going to the program and sitting down when nothing works and they have no idea where the business is going to end up and they're trying to figure it out. That to me is when it's fun. Mm-hmm. And when it's working, it's just kind of boring. And so I'm struggling with this because Techstars kind of works now. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to bring in people that know how to build a real business and scale it in the Techstars side. Yeah. So I'm trying to get back to my roots and be more of an investor and really try to be helpful to these companies directly.
Okay, so how do you pick the people that actually run the local programs? I mean, they need to be almost investor, entrepreneurs, mentors themselves.
Yeah. We've experimented with that. We call them managing directors. Yeah. Jason Seitz is a great example in Austin, Texas. He's the founder of SliceHost. Yeah. Very technical guy. Alex Iskold in New York. So we like that profile, and they want to become or have done a little bit of angel investing. So they sort of have that bug of being an investor long term, but really can speak the language to these startups. So that's a good pattern, I think, for a
But also need to be a strict dad, almost,
well,
to...
a little bit of a camp counselor mentality, right? If you were a summer camp counselor, you're probably going to do well, because you've got to orchestrate these folks, and they sort of all, there's usually about 1,000 that apply, and then about 10 companies get in, and they all come in and they think, nothing's wrong, right? And then 2 days in, they're like, oh shit, these guys are good too, right? Maybe they're better than me, and they start to learn from each other. And then they meet the mentors, and they get so much help. So, they get humble quickly, and you kind of knock them down a little bit, but then they build back up and turn into great businesses, hopefully.
Okay. So do you see a different success rate with, say, incubators versus, let's say, more traditional angel-funded companies? Are there, let me put it different, are there success metrics that you've been using that kind of indicates whether you're doing a good job or not?
Well, the industry uses metrics that you sort of have to answer to, like funding and things like this, that are intermediate
return
goals,
on whatever.
Right? I mean, so if you go through Techstars, the average company's going to raise $1.5 million. But I care about things like revenue and employees, right? Those are the things that are sort of more indicative of real businesses. So we're actually trying to flip that conversation from being so funding heavy to being more about what are you actually building and how much acceleration is there. We do have a selection bias, right? I mean, we're taking 1% or so of applicants. There's more than that actually get angel funded out there. So I would hope that most of our companies would have a shot at doing well.
So, the difference between, let's say, big exits versus building a sustainable business. Are you able to pick on early on? Is there a preference that you have for, let's say, sort of on one hand, the big consumer business, let's say the Snapchat, that might be a good example, of something where you first look and say, really? Versus something like, I think I saw that Jason Fried was in the video as well. If you look at 37 Signals, for a very long time, they run their consulting or their web business, the development business. Next to that, they were running 37 Signals, so really focused on building a long-term sustainable business. Is there a preference that you have for one or the other, or can you early on make the differentiation?
So it's actually pretty rare that you run into somebody like Jason that says, never going to take venture capital, just want to sort of build a small business that's very profitable. Most people come in saying, I want to build something huge, right? They aspirationally want to build something that's giant. And it's not that they necessarily want to target venture capital, but they're sort of open to the idea. We do look for companies that we think can really change the world in meaningful ways. And often that means scale up and get big. The secret is that you just don't know, right? You can pretend you have a crystal ball as an investor, or you can try a lot of stuff with really great founders that are really motivated and have an insight, try to give them advantage, and see what emerges out of that. So people look at what we do and they say, wow, you're funding 100 companies a year, that's a lot. Well, it's 1% of what we see, right? And they're all just great teams that you want to back. So you really just don't know most of the time. They want to build something big, and you're backing the people in most cases.
Going back to the business of an accelerator itself, has the business of acceleration sort of changed in the past 7 years as well? Were the things that you thought that you were doing differently 7 years ago versus that you do them now?
Well, I mean, certainly there's something like 800 accelerators in the world now. And for those that don't know, accelerator is funding the companies. They're not just incubating them with office space that they charge for. They're generally short term. There's now hundreds of these things, right? So, one of the things that I think is great about that is that as an entrepreneur, you can do it anywhere, right? You can get support in a lot of different places now. And I mean, there are amazing startups in Vegas. There are amazing startups in Portland, right? And certainly in Boulder and other places that might surprise you. And I think people will be surprised by where some of the great companies come from. But from my perspective, we've been doing the same thing, which is trying to build this fantastic network that if you get plugged into can open doors for you and give you opportunity. We're just doing that at a scale that's different from most at this point.
You haven't thought about really franchising it out yet?
No, we want to control the product that we're delivering. But I think I think Brad said it. Brad Feld in the video there. It's the template for the mentor-driven accelerator. I think the idea of surrounding these companies with the community is what really caught on and went around the world, and you now see that in almost every entrepreneurial community in the world. So it's really become a model, I think, and that's one of the things I think I'm most proud of. It's really changed entrepreneurship.
A lot of course, the attention goes towards sort of the demo day, end day of any sort of, that's where all the hype happens. That appears to totally get much more intensified, probably. Yeah. And lots of the stories about folks getting VC investment on the day on demo day and stuff like that. How much of that is? Do you enjoy that side of it, or do you think it's bothersome?
Well, we are, with the recent regulation changes, right? We really are getting back to what it was intended to be, which is a hello to the world, right? It's a demo day, right? It's not a pitch day. And I think it turned into, over the years, really much more about the investment and less about show me the technology and get me excited about what you're doing, which, oh, by the way, leads to investment, right? And so, I think we sort of are getting back to that where, hey, let's actually show the demo. And everybody knows these companies are raising money. They have great tools. We hear from Angellist, things like that they can leverage now. And I think that's something people are hungry for, is really make it about the company and what they're doing and not about just the social proof. You should invest in me because somebody else is. Who cares, right? Let's see the product.
Can you talk a little bit about the regulation changes? Maybe educate, I don't know whether everybody's aware of
sure.
the kind of things that happen.
I mean, there's just a bunch of, there's a cloud right now around the idea of generally soliciting for investment. Standing up on a stage in front of, oh, by the way, any of you guys want to invest in a company that I'm playing with? That would be a general solicitation. Yeah. Right? And you can do that, right? But there's some lack of clarity around, what it means when you do that and what it can cause. There's also the crowdfunding stuff, right? I mean, what you see on Angellist is that 50 people can come together and each put in a few $1,000s and invest in a startup together. And that's awesome, right? So there's just a lot of change going on right now. I think we just decided in the midst of it, everybody knows they're raising money, right? They're going to come talk to them if they like the product. So let's really focus on the tech and the demo, and we've enjoyed getting back to that recently.
I sort of change the gears a little bit. If one of your companies in one of your programs actually tells you they want to buy hardware, what do you tell them?
I tell them I hope that's a karma.
No, I was thinking about, let's say they want to go the traditional. Does it happen? Are there still companies that are actually doing this?
I actually can think of one or two in the portfolio. They just are big believers that what they're doing is so specialized or whatever, that they are building out a data center in the middle of their office, and there's wires strung everywhere and all these. And I just look at them and go, geez, crazy. I mean, what a huge advantage we have today as entrepreneurs to, not have all that infrastructure in our way. When I started my first companies, that's what you did, right? You set up servers and you dealt with all that stuff and you patched systems, and now you just come into work and there's new features and it's awesome, right? And I think that's just it just means that all that stuff is not in your way and you can focus on your business, which is amazing for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we like about the whole accelerator model is that you allow us as partners to come in and actually hold office hours and actually give close support to as well as give some credits and make sure that these guys get off the ground without as a lowest possible barrier.
Yeah, it's been an awesome partnership, and I think that's really the biggest thing. I mean, the credits are awesome, but really the ability to sit down with the companies, understand what they're trying to do, and have the specialists be there and say, like, here's what you could take advantage of, here's how you might approach this problem. It's a huge, huge advantage for the companies.
Are there, let's say, just particular things that you're excited about at the moment? I mean, is there, if you would start a company right now, I mean, you're not doing Techstars anymore, I mean, someone else takes it over, whatever, and you have to do a company again, what field would you do that in?
So I've been investing in infrastructure stuff for a while now. I mean, I'm an early investor in Twilio that you talked to earlier. Companies like SendGrid, Big Door. I mean, I love take something that's just hard, difficult, annoying, and just make it dead simple, right? And so that's probably what I would do. I don't know exactly what I would do today because I get to start 100 companies a year anyway.
Yeah.
And I do give away a lot of ideas, but I'm a huge infrastructure fan.
Some of the things that I'm excited about is seeing how younger business are able to take on large, established sort of businesses, banking, retail, let's say cable companies, telco companies like Twilio, where the playing field seems to be leveled. Yeah, where you're able to actually start as a young business, actually have a chance, like Simple and others that try to change banking. Do you see a lot of companies? It's a much harder space to be in because there's such huge competitors out there. But whereas a younger business, you have a chance to actually make a difference and do things differently, probably with a much more customer-centric focus. Because, I mean, who here loves his bank? Nobody does. Yeah. No, not anymore. I think when I grew up, my parents loved the bank, and they had a good relationship with the bank. Now everybody hates their bank. So, is there something in that particular world that you see a lot of happening more?
Well, I mean, isn't that it, right? A lot of times these things are relationship driven, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can build something that feels more personal, right? It feels more like the old days of being connected, but it's more convenient and it works better. I think that's a great model for people. We have a company in London that is trying to build a credit card for kids, right? That makes it really easy to, buy and spend and have allowance and parents tied in and all that. So I think it's a great example of something that could just be simpler and friendlier, but feel very personal and like a real relationship.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned London. Do you feel there's a difference between, let's say, startups in London is then a big hub, of course, but is there a difference between US versus non-US?
Well, I mean, certainly the environments are different, right? The cultures, the whether or not failure is accepted can be very different in different parts of the world.
Going bankrupt, for example, is something like that. It's very different in different times of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, also just the willingness of investors to jump in early, right? We're fortunate to have so many people are willing to take risk on entrepreneurs here in the US. It's not the case everywhere. But you do see a lot of, in certain hubs, in London, for example, you'll see a lot of financial services type companies, right? But it's just sort of what's in the community. New York, there's a lot of media, for example. So, there's always that relationship to the community. But one thing I noticed, I actually lived in London for a month when we launched there in July, and I blogged about this. I said, people are working on the same kind of stuff, right? And that they're thinking about problems the same way. That's good and bad. I think the opportunity is to really think of something different and amazing, but execution's a big part of it. But you do see a lot of overlap in the kinds of problems that people are trying to solve in different places.
You must get a lot of feedback from customers, from your companies about how they're using our services. Do you know anything of a wish list? I mean, you're a hacker turned VC yourself, so is there stuff that we could do better?
I mean, first off, on the hacker turned VC, I mean, yes, a software engineer.
Sorry, software engineer turned investor.
That's what we used to call it. That's what we used to call it. And computer science in school and all that. And I was terrible. I was a terrible developer. I always built the first thing, the thing that, so my first company was an ambulance software. Okay, so I built the first version of that, 100%, client server back in the day. And, you don't want me building that kind of stuff, right? So you want me building the prototype, and then you guys come in and build the real thing. But no, I mean, I think generally, you're asking me to pick on you a little bit. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we have a company that's out here in the show called Cloudability. Have you run into those guys? They're just trying to solve the problem of, it's so difficult to understand what something is going to cost or what pieces you need, and there's just so much to the platform. There's like innovation on your pricing page, right? That you have all these cool scroll bars because there's just so much there, right? And it's really hard to digest. And I think sometimes our companies struggle, and that's why those solutions engineers are so valuable. But I think we owe it to them to just simplify the delivery model.
Yeah, the thing is that we started off really simple. Yeah, and the thing is that at the same time, customers ask us to add, for example, take the instance types. Today we launched 2, 3 new instance types. And within those instance types, was at least 6 variations, again, in terms of size. You know, and why? Because customers want to have instances with SSDs that are actually cheaper than the other instance types with SSDs and want more variation, want to be able to pick it. It makes it harder. And we definitely know how hard it is to put the burden on developers to pick the right, one. Yeah.
So like Cloudability is a good example of someone that lets you try to understand what's going on with your spend, right?
And on the other hand, I think that's you know, it opens up room in the ecosystem for a successful business, and I think the Cloudability guys really are, you know, providing a very valuable service to our customers. Yeah. With that, David, thank you very much. I hope you stick around for the cupcakes afterwards.
Absolutely.
And thanks for all the things that you've done for the community.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks. Next, I would like to probably invite on stage what I would call one of the bigger inventors or the new cool guys in the whole world of investing or things that go around for it. Ash Fontana, I don't know what your real title is actually. What's
everything to do with fundraising.
Okay, good. Yeah. So part of Angellist, it's kind of rocked the world with giving a platform for young businesses that are looking for funding. Is that the right way to describe it?
Yeah, funding.
Actually make them known to the world. Also give them background on the companies, who are the mentors, who are advisors and things like that. So for those in the audience that don't know about Angellist, give us the pitch.
Yeah, it's a place where you just put up information about your company and then go on to do a series of important transactions. More specifically, usually fundraising. So you put up info and then you meet investors, but also finding candidates as well. We've got a big recruiting platform. And then there's a lot of B2B sales and all sorts of other company-to-company networking activities.
Oh, tell us a bit about that business to business, but I'm not familiar with it. So tell us a bit what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, most people go to Angellist to raise money, but then, you know, once you've raised money and hired your team, what do? We see a lot of organic activity on Angellist where people are just contacting each other, especially among developers, to sell developer tools to each other and sell other software services and sell whatever to each other. So while it's very much focused on fundraising today, there is all sorts of other networking activity that goes on.
Okay, so the information in essence, Angellist is a large database that holds all the information about, you know, many young businesses in this world. How do you validate that? Is there a validation going on with that data to make sure that, you know, the words around the company are indeed truth instead of something that has been made up?
The number one thing we do is we've just got a good social networking architecture where everything is confirmed and double opted in, and it's all about the social proof. So the social proof that someone is actually involved in a company or that someone has referenced a company and whatnot. So that's the main way we validate data on Angellist. But we're certainly looking to, in future, pull sort of more objective sources of data direct from service providers and whatnot to verify that the company, for example, has as much activity as it says it does.
Okay. Are you also, let's say, adding additional information that comes from third-party sources, let's say, not triggered by the company themselves? I know that I've received emails from you guys when a company says that I'm an advisor to them, that I actually have to tell them that they actually have to approve that that's an advisor. But, you know, are you collecting information from different sources about the company as well?
Yeah, today we do, from a lot of press and other sort of central databases of funding announcements and whatnot, company size, just general company databases. So we collect a bit of that today, but again, the focus is on like the users generating their own information about their company and then confirming it through social proof.
So do you see quite a bit of, let's say, the investment community coming to you to really actively find investment opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some investors run their entire business on Angellist.
Really?
And a lot of accelerators run their business on Angellist. They do their applications, they raise funds and whatnot as well. And then, you know, once you get to later stage investing where the people are writing, you know, $10, $20 million checks, they probably use Angellist more just for informational purposes.
Okay.
You know, never before have you been able to calibrate the traction of a company when compared to 250,000 other startups, or even just 10 other startups doing something very similar to what it's doing.
Talk a bit about how you're interacting with accelerators. You say you provide them with functionality such that they can actually look for the next batch of
Yeah.
interesting companies to pull in, or?
Yeah, we're sort of very complementary to all parts of the ecosystem, accelerators included. So accelerators are amazing at providing mentorship at the very, very early stage. What we do is we just make certain parts of that process a lot easier. So applications, for example, a lot of accelerators accept all their applications through Angellist. You just have your Angellist profile, answer a few questions, click a button, and you've applied. We also help them raise funds. So, if for investors, it's great. They can click one button and, for example, invest in every single Techstars company in the current, a current class in a particular city. And that's great for the startups because then they get a whole bunch of money.
Okay, but that's separate from the whole syndication idea.
Yes.
So you guys have gotten a lot of attention recently for the syndication idea. Explain us a bit what syndication means.
Yeah, I mean, syndication as a concept has been around for a very long time. Syndicating debt offerings, sharing a deal with your friends. I mean, that's syndicating, right? Getting a group together to invest in something. And we've just made this a lot easier for people to do. So not only can you syndicate to people you know, but involve people you don't yet know, who just find out about the deal otherwise. And then we give you a fund structure so that you can put all those people together and then really cleanly and in an entirely online process, invest in that company and maybe take some fees and whatever else as well.
So if this is such a common process, or common approach actually, why does it create so much controversy? There is controversy.
I think because there's it's one thing to sort of incrementally improve and make it slightly easier, but it's another thing to make it so much cheaper that all of a sudden it's very easy for an individual investor to compete with a fund. Like in the past, if you wanted to start a venture fund to invest in these companies and get groups of people together to invest in these deals, you had to know people with a lot of money. You had to have a lot of lawyers. You had to set up all these 10-year funds. You had to raise money in advance. And that was a very significant barrier to entry in VC. Now we've just made it so cheap, as in it's no cost at all to the investors. So anyone can start a fund. So while the idea's been around for a long time, we have fundamentally changed the pricing of it and also just the ability to reach your leverage, so your ability to reach more people from one point, such that it's a totally different idea now.
Yeah, and which deals mainly, in my eyes, with the financial side of it, where, of course, VCs, but also incubators will, of course, have a different role to play, even in advising or in mentoring and things like that. You mentioned there removing friction. I think this is one of the things that you guys believe very strongly in, because I think in your mission statement or whatever it is, that it's removing friction for startups.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what are the biggest friction points?
Well, honestly, any use of any resource usually involves friction. You've got all sorts of capital, infrastructure, goods, and whatnot. So AWS obviously removes friction on the infrastructure side, and we're removing friction on the capital side. And then we're both, in very different ways, removing friction on the labor side. You guys provide a way for people to engage low-cost labor with Turk, and then we provide a way for you to engage with really high-cost specialized labor with developers and designers and Angellist talent. There are still so many friction points. I mean, you can think of domain-specific friction points that this is something AWS could work on at one point. APIs in specific domains, so checking the eligibility of someone's health insurance status or car insurance status, or telephony services like Twilio. Those are massive friction points. Payment stuff, either with, you guys do a little bit of that, or Bitcoin payments,
all about
whatever else. So there are still all of those friction points which really prevent some companies or some problems from being solved because of the massive startup costs, and there are plenty more.
Plenty more. So, talking a little bit about metrics. So what are metrics that are actually determining? So if I'm an investor and I go out to Angellist, what are sort of the metrics I should be looking at? Are you guys servicing metrics to your customers as well?
Yeah, we do. The startups upload all sorts of information about their traction, how many users they have, how much money they're making, how many people they have working for them, all that sort of stuff. And it's really interesting how important this is now. In the past, 10 years ago, you could have an MBA and raise money with just an idea. Now, because it's so much cheaper to start a company, it's within reach to put an app up on AWS within most people's credit card limit for a couple of months. You can't do that anymore. Technologists need not apply. Non-technologists need not apply, I should say. And so because the barrier has dropped so much, investors basically don't look at startups without any traction, that haven't got out there, released something, and got some users because it is just so cheap now. So we provide all these metrics on Angellist. It's increasingly important, and the bar is just getting higher and higher as the cost of starting a company is getting lower and lower.
Okay, so metrics are around traction. So how do you collect those metrics? How do you make sure that that is?
Yeah, the startup just uploads
Oh, they
them
do
all
it
themselves. And
Okay.
and there's not necessarily any objective verification of those metrics. Obviously, it's impossible to verify like every usage stat, but there are some interesting ways that we might be able to do this in future by feeding directly from some of the infrastructure providers.
Okay, so you guys have been in business probably 4 or 5 years or so now?
Yeah, in earnest, about 3 and a bit years, but Angellist has been around in some form for 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So what's the impact that you guys have had?
You can measure it a couple of ways. I mean, we've directly raised a good couple of $100 million for companies. Over 1,300 companies have raised money successfully through Angellist. Thousands of people are getting matched to companies per week for jobs.
Okay.
We've raised, very recently, people raising money just online. That product is doing tens of millions of dollars already, and it's only been around a couple of months. Startups that raise money on Angellist have gone on to raise quite a lot of money, in the billions of dollars. And some of those startups are already successful. Startups like Uber and Pinterest raised money on it originally on Angellist.
Okay, cool. Yeah. How do you guys make money?
So we're playing the long game for sure. We currently are taking carried interest, so we share in the profits of investors who invest through Angellist, which we think really aligns our incentives quite well. But it means we're probably not going to get paid for a very long time. So in the meantime, we're keeping the lights on, so to speak, by exploring avenues like charging to match companies to candidates and developers. And we have a really good collection of high-quality developers and designers. Either they've tried to start a company and they've failed, and then they're on Angellist, or they've come to us another way. And we're exploring ways to make money through that.
So things that people have always asked on the retail side, like we know all this information about products and inside in products and how customer behavior and things like that, why we've never started a business of selling that kind of information. You guys must have had yourselves an enormous insight in what's happening in the community, in what's happening in the startup world. Is that information that you're surfacing to particular groups as well, or is that something that you keep to yourselves?
At a very basic level, we do service it. We provide all sorts of aggregate information on valuations and salaries to people around it, which just wasn't available before. A lot of people ask us, are you building predictive models inside your company to figure out what companies will be successful and whatnot? It's very delicate. We don't want to. We're an open marketplace, and we don't want to meddle with the market, so to speak, and place our own selective bets within that market. Because at the moment it's an invisible hand, and I think people will be able to tell very quickly when it becomes visible. So we're being very, very careful about that. But we do certainly think that exposing more of this information about what are the things that make a company successful, what are the early signs that a company can be successful, will help a lot of people and reduce the experimentation cost of a lot of these companies.
Okay. You're not a technologist yourself, are you? Or
not really. I mean, I've been playing around with this stuff since I was like 3 or 4. But
yeah, but this is what I've asked all the other guests today. Is there any feedback that you have for us? That we could do better.
Yeah.
Is there something that you had in mind there?
It's more about new businesses. So we see thousands of new companies per week come to Angellist every single week. A lot of those companies are on developer tools and software infrastructure stuff. And some trends that I'm seeing that are like huge pain points for startups, and it's not necessarily things that AWS are doing badly, but things that AWS and Amazon proper could definitely help with. Logistics, a massive issue. Working capital, holding inventory for companies, and being that middleman. Essentially, there are all these things that become so much easier with the internet, but you need a combination of the internet and a bunch of other infrastructure to make it easier. Domain-specific APIs, like I was saying before, forcing standards on certain industries like the insurance industry or in payments, so that it becomes much easier to then serve information between companies through APIs, so that a startup doesn't have to hire a very expensive BD person to get a special deal with a health insurance company to get a bit of data that they can then use to build their company and build their product. So it'd be great because Amazon has such clout and also such great infrastructure around things like working capital management. if they could do a lot more to standardize in those areas. That'd be hugely helpful.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ash. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a great player in this world. Stick around for the cake afterwards. Yep. I would like next to invite on stage. It's been a long day, guys. Albert-Wenger, a great friend of Amazon, actually, and great friend of Technologist, the Technologist himself, partner in USV. Please have a seat. Thanks that you could make it.
So I came rushing over from another conference here in Vegas, and that was running late, and so I was furiously texting, and I was saying, I think Werner might have to tell a few jokes. And apparently you didn't, so.
No, thanks for also being here on time, then. Well, I think Union Square Ventures has, I mean, you guys are star-rocketing. I think, you know, you guys made great investment in some of the consumer-facing technologies. As well as, you know, we had Mongo on stage earlier, Elliot Horowitz. You also made great technology investment. So what makes you guys so successful?
So at the core of our firm and the core of our investing is kind of a belief in the internet. And a belief that the internet is a thing that will sort of impact everything. And by everything, we mean not just sort of technology, but society, education, healthcare, government, financial services. And what we try to do as much as possible is sort of develop concrete ideas as to how the internet will impact those different areas. And at the heart of a lot of our thinking is this idea that we're living in an era where networks are substituting for hierarchies. And so we try to find businesses that have some kind of network at the heart of their operations. And just to give some examples, you know, the examples like Twitter or Tumblr are obvious. They are networks, you know, you follow other people. But networks or network effects exist in other areas, you know, and you're very familiar with them in technology. So, you know, a platform that gets adopted quickly has a lot of network effects because there's training that people offer, there's third-party tooling, there is libraries, and so that's a type of a network effect. And so that's kind of at the heart of our investing, and I think it makes it, having sort of a very concrete idea of the type of thing we're looking for, makes it easier for us to say no to a lot of things. First of all, we don't do biotech, nanotech, or any of that. And then even within the internet, we do just a few things that fit with that thesis. And so I think that's sort of been the thing that's driven most of our investing.
Yeah, so we talked to David Cohen earlier, and I think, of course, one of the bigger things in their approach is mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, the amount of time that as a company you get with sort of high-quality mentors. You guys remain very actively involved with most of the companies that you fund in. So can you talk to us a bit about what are the kind of things you do in sort of the interaction with companies after your investment?
So we tend to be board members of pretty much all the companies we invest in. But the board meeting is only one type of interaction. There's a lot of informal interaction with the entrepreneurs. But one of the things we've done over the last couple of years is that we've actually started to build a network of our own, and it's the network of our portfolio companies. We actually have 2 people on our team full-time who do nothing but help the Union Square Ventures portfolio companies network with each other. So the way it works is we have lots of in-person groups. For instance, all the community managers from across the portfolio get together in person a couple times a year. And then they also have an online group. And because we tend to not have competing businesses in our portfolio, these groups have very, very open discussions. And a lot of questions get answered in those groups. And you know, if you have new communities, relatively new communities, and you have old communities like Etsy, it's been around for a long time, or Wattpad, it's been around for 7 years, those community managers have a lot of knowledge that they can pass on to the people who are just getting going. And that's become very, very powerful. So we have this in lots of different working groups. And so instead of trying to build up our own staff and have a large team, what we're trying to do is help the companies help each other. And that's kind of the same network thesis that I was describing for our investing. we believe in dog fooding, like just like in technology. So if we think that networks can solve problems, we think we should use a network to solve our problems of giving advice and giving mentorship.
So let's, you talked about, let's say the companies that have obvious network effects because they're just playing the social space, where these networks are obvious to see from the outside world. It's a lot harder in, let's say, the developer business, where I find that technology companies have a much harder case to make. I mean, how big they will grow, how fast they will grow, and what kind of networks effect there could be in their world, I think. But on the other hand, Mongo just raised $150 million, making them probably the best funded company in New York. But what makes Mongo so special that they are able to attract such high levels of investment while they are a hardcore technology company?
Well, I actually don't. The whole sort of the whole question of how much money a company has raised versus how successful it is sort of a, there's a potential,
successful in raising money. I assume success in raising money means the opportunity that is there.
What's been interesting is having watched Dwight and Elliot, from the very early days, is that they really care about making the product easily accessible for engineers and developers. You hit a download button, they have pre-compiled versions. They're trying to be on every platform, so you just hit a button and install it. So there's a lot of attention that's gone into trying to make it easy, trying to have drivers for all sorts of languages. And so very early on, they decided that was going to be important. It was going to be important to have good education. They invested heavily in the education program. Dwight and Elliot themselves travel an extraordinary amount around the world, meeting with end users, going to organizing sort of Mongo meetups. And I think that's been part of why there's been so much growth in usage. And that was very kind of deliberate on their part from early on. So trying to build a community of people who contribute back, who, when there's a new language, usually somebody writes a driver very quickly. And that's the type of network effect that I was describing earlier. If you have to every time sort of go and do everything yourself, it's a lot harder.
What kind of advice would you have towards, let's say, startups or young businesses that are really technology focused, let's say, or that cater to the developer space, such as, let's say, companies that operate in the world of continuous deployment or continuous integration and things like that? It's much harder to demonstrate, to show the sexiness of that to investors. So is there a particular advice that you have to those kind of companies about how to best work towards growth?
Well, I think there are many different types of businesses in the world, right? And I think it's entirely legitimate and many times very advisable to build a business where you don't raise a lot of money or no money at all, and you own a lot of it and you control a lot of it. And I think in a lot of the tool space, where you're building a tool that is used by some developers, but it's really not very visible to anybody other than the particular engineers using it, you're probably better off trying to stay really lean and focused and kind of doing that, and maybe just having an open source model at the core of it. But I come back to the same idea, which is the companies in our portfolio that do technology, like Twilio, for instance, that have invested very heavily in developer evangelism, that have invested very heavily in kind of not just the core tech, but everything that's around it. So the documentation, how easy it is to set up an account, how easy it is to get going, that has paid off in spades for those companies. Firebase is another recent example. So but when you're more in the back, the more in the back you are, and the more it's a tool, and there are multiple people writing tools that are kind of competing tools, I think the more it is the kind of company where you want to keep it small and focused.
So as you mentioned that, so open source is an important differentiating there in being able to achieve a sort of network effect around your technologies.
It can be, yes. It can be a big contributor. Okay. Absolutely.
You personally have a computer science background. You're a technologist. How much does that help you on a daily basis in when you look at these companies and interact with these companies?
Well, I think it helps in a couple of ways. So I first learned how to program 30-some years ago now. And one of the things that it helps is to recognize that even though to people who just enter the field, lots of stuff seems new, nothing is actually really all that new. I mean, it sort of looks new, but it's not all that new. And so I think that perspective is very helpful because it makes you realize that it's not just about the technology. It's about how you're approaching the timing of what it is that you're doing and how that's solving a particular problem. So I think if we sort of look at these various waves that have happened, we've sort of shifted things back and forth between being on the server and being on the client, and we have new languages, but the core concepts have not sort of changed fundamentally. Now, what I do think has changed tremendously, and I think this is the important part to focus on, is how technology gets into the enterprise. And I think this is why there's such a big opportunity today. So for the longest time, there really was no alternative to the enterprise sales model. And so I think there were some waves of relatively promising startups and technologies that never got the sales model right, and so kind of went nowhere. And I think that's the fundamental power of the internet, is you really don't need anybody's permission. Like, if you have a great technology, you can put it out there, and people can start using it. And before you know it, you can have thousands of enterprises using your technology, and then you can figure out how to start charging them and how to have enterprise plans and everything. You can sort of do that the other way around from what used to be possible. And I think companies like GitHub, there's lots of good examples of that, not just in our own portfolio, that show that model at work. And I think that is very, very different. So the technology itself, yes, there's lots of innovation, but it's really just sort of, in some ways, some of the same old, but how you get it to the people, very, very different.
Yeah, and also sometimes the realization that in the old days, maybe enterprises were controlled by IT, but the fact that business units themselves have to move much faster. In most enterprises, developers are part of the business units, not of the IT organization. And even cases where I've already seen organizations setting up complete sort of shadow IT organizations to be able to, moving on cloud, moving much faster, bringing in technologies from much smaller businesses than that they would do in the past, actually helps them move faster. Yeah. And I believe that the market is completely open for young businesses to help CIOs be the innovator in their own business as well. I hear many CIOs be able to, really expressing a need for, no, we don't need that one big CRM system. There's just one business unit that needs a CRM system that's really good in being programmable and being mobile, and then willing to actually look at young businesses because their models are different as well. I mean, the cloud model gives them then the ability to actually charge very, very lightweight as well.
Except that I wouldn't start as a startup with a CIO.
No,
I would start with the engineer, right? You build something for the engineer.
Absolutely, totally. And I think that's the way to get into the business. Yeah. I mean, it's targeting, building the right developers tools to really get them inside. That's absolutely the case. But in the past, the CIO would be the blocker towards that. And I think...
Sorry.
And I think that's no longer the case. Yep. I think it's sort of riding on the back of the cloud. I think cloud has helped there to open up the CIO's minds to the fact that, oh wait, we no longer have to commit ourselves to one single vendor, but we can bring multiple vendors and even be experimental with bringing in multiple vendors or allowing multiple vendors on the platform. Sorry, I be sure you got supposed to talk, not me. You have your MIT background. Yeah, and so if I look at some of the companies that look very simple on the outside but are really complex on the inside, I think Dropbox probably is a great example of started by MIT engineers with really complex technology but make things really simple on the outside world. Are you guys investors in Dropbox actually?
We're not.
Not.
Can't get all the great business.
You have to have some business somewhere. Would you still invest in a company that would be using data centers and hardware?
Oh.
That's a meme.
I would say, given all the new announcements you're making every time, even at this reInvent, it's probably changing the equation every day, because you still get those little pockets where somebody says, well, yeah, but I need a lot of GPUs. And you go, oh, yeah, I think they just announced that.
We hope to. You must also get a lot of feedback from your companies. What can we as AWS do better?
I'll tell you something that doesn't come from our companies, but I think it's very important. There's I think, a huge overall threat for the internet from a variety of sometimes well-meaning and sometimes maybe not so well-meaning, both regulation and surveillance. And I think it's nearly impossible for individual small startups to somehow figure out how to deal with that, with all those threats. And I think Amazon, with its scale, is in a position where it can say, okay, we could actually, if those regulations come to pass, where if you have EU data, you need to keep it in the EU, we could actually help you do that. Because no two-person startup wants to figure out how to do that. Even better would be to make sure that regulation doesn't come to pass in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm actually part of the European Cloud. Yeah, okay, yes, you can clap for that. We are totally on board with that. I'm a member of the steering board for the European Cloud Partnership. That's the one that advised Ms. Cruz, for example, on not always even successful, but I think we're getting there. On one hand, being sort of a major player and really advising on because I think, for example, in the EU, even though there is this recurrence of sort of suspicion about anything that it's American, which is actually mostly driven by politicians and by media. Most of the companies I'm talking to actually are not that concerned. They're concerned about regulations that may be coming their way, and we're trying to help people like Ms. Cruz, who's the Vice President of the European Union, to be very sensible about this. Of course, you need to, their first and foremost task is to protect their citizens. But also, she wants to make sure that even though they're protecting the citizens, that the regulations do not get in the way of other businesses to move fast. Now, I think next to what we need to do in terms of helping out there, we also need to make sure that we can use our technology powers to this. We need to make sure that we provide encryption tools and techniques that our customers can be using, such that, and also the education around it, such that our customers can actually tell their customers that they are really the only ones that have access to their data. Yeah, I believe that we can also, at the technology level, make huge progress by actually giving the control back to customers about who actually accesses their data. Next to that, remember, Amazon and Amazon.com and AWS are not part of the PRISM program, before anybody asks. Yes. But your criticism is well taken, and our criticism, your advice is well taken, and we will definitely continue to invest in that area. Albert, thanks for being a great friend of AWS.
Good to see you as always.
Thanks.